Hey, welcome everybody to With Thunder's Applause, podcast where two friends get together to discuss the events and ideas that will shape our uncertain future. I am your host, Steve, along with my co host, Zach. And before we jumped on here, in fact, probably attributable to our several minutes of our delay, we were talking about video games. How you doing?
Pretty good. I just downloaded a Star Trek MMO to see what it was like.
The one on the phone?
No, it's
Oh,
it's on the
Fleet
Epic.
Command or whatever?
No, it's not that one, but I have tried that one and it wasn't very good.
They
This one,
advertised to me heavy.
yeah, this one is called just Star Trek Online.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see.
Ooh.
I don't have a lot of faith in MMOs anymore. I kind of like realized that feeling that I had when I was young, where I was like, wow, I wish the story could just continue forever. No, you don't. Stories need endings. If they don't
Stories
have
do
it,
need endings.
it gets kind of like
Even the
boring.
human story will have an ending.
It does. I'm more and
The
more
human
convinced of
story's
it.
ending is we're probably nearing the epilogue is how I feel about it.
The more I live life, the more I'm convinced of it. Like I tried to play D&D today at a local bar that does games in addition to drinking, and they wanted to charge me $15 so I could sit for 4 hours and pay $8 a beer. Now, a bar can succeed with more employees than this place has, just being a bar. So why the fuck can't this place succeed as a bar and just offer the gaming as a side thing? And if you do
As a
want to
way to
play
bring
some
people in or
exactly, and if you
incentivize.
exactly, and if you do want to play their board games, sure, maybe there's a small rental fee on the board games or something
Yeah,
like
for
that.
to cover depreciation, the fact that people are going to spill their fucking drinks on the cards and
Yeah,
shit.
yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But if you're just coming in, bringing yourself and all your own shit, just let me buy beer. Shut the fuck up. And if there are some people that come in and don't buy anything, that's just the cost of doing business.
Oh man, you
Bars
come
too.
so infrequently. I wish we had a chance to go to the Chico Tap Room last you were here.
Yeah, I mean, even that place wasn't perfect, but it was better than what we got here.
They at least had some tables.
Yeah.
You probably, unless you went like in the early afternoon on a weeknight, you could probably RPG there. There are tables that are private enough to do that.
Yeah.
But for the most part, like it's really kind of we could play a like quick game like Munchkin or something.
Oh yeah. I mean, we
Right?
played on weekends like around noon, and it usually wasn't very busy. So I mean, it's all just a matter of timing.
Cool. Well, we have a great show. This is a Thursday night stream, so this is Shooting the Poodoo. I was going to say a special Thursday night stream, but Shooting the Poodoo tends to be what
Usually
we do when we're not putting in more effort to produce like something different.
Yeah.
Which I think the quality of the discussion is equal in
This
both
one's pretty well
instances.
produced.
This one's pretty well produced for being produced largely in the last 3 hours. But we have a good show. So I came across some news items that I wanted to touch on. One of them is a story from Democracy Now! And they're going to talk a little bit about victory with climate organizers achieving a victory. And pardon me. And then we're going to talk about these nasty floods in Libya just briefly. Excuse me. Sorry, transitioning from hoppy beer to fucking piss beer or whatever.
Love that piss.
Yeah, so going to talk about the Libyan floods and then discuss a little bit that in more detail with a couple other extra things added on, some other layers contributing to that situation there. Of course, American imperialism is what I'm alluding to. And then we're going to talk about Ahsoka because we watched. I know we talked about Ahsoka Monday, but that's because we didn't meet Thursday to talk about last week. So we talked about last week's on Monday, and then Tuesday, episode 5 came out, and we're going to talk about that. And I have mixed feelings, but overall, my spirits are fairly high. But let's talk about that when we get to the end. We're going to start with the little climate victory out of NYU.
Yes, indeed.
In a major victory for climate activists,
Major.
New York University plans to divest from fossil fuels. Student organizers have been pushing for the divestment for nearly 20 years. The Guardian reported the chair of the NYU Board of Trustees announced a decision in an August letter addressed to Sunrise NYU. The group wrote on social media, quote, "This is a huge win for climate justice. Congratulations to every student organizer who made this happen," they said. And in Washington, D.C., at least 34 indigenous activists.
Because that's all we were going to cover.
That's all we're going to cover.
Nice clip. I actually do appreciate Democracy Now's like news headlines. They're very succinct. I often listen to them in the car, but sometimes, like this morning, I forget what it was, but I was like, I don't know if I want the kids getting primed for a school day on like some fucking heady ass shit, like
flooding and
like shit, flooding, or like 20 people killed in a suicide bomb in Pakistan. You're like, oh shit, okay, maybe not. Or whatever it is, right? Like,
hey man, something for the kids to talk about. Otherwise, what are they going to talk about? What happened on the most recent episode of the TV show that was out? I don't know.
No, they haven't seen it.
Oh no,
they don't watch TV on school nights. I mean, they do at their mom's, but they don't watch Star Wars because they would watch Star Wars with me, and I don't let them watch TV on school night. Mostly. Occasionally I do. I watched Tuesdays they were here in the last several months. They watched Ahsoka with me. Just because I'm watching it on Tuesday night and they happen to be here.
Yeah.
I was like, this is the exception, not the rule. And we've held to that. If they're not with us on Tuesday, we'll watch it and then watch it again with them on Friday.
Pure torture.
Well, that's the thing is, it's like I can't not be on fucking YouTube for 4 straight days.
Yeah,
I just can't.
Yeah,
it's my entertainment. Like, it's my primary means. I was listening to podcasts while I was watering plants earlier, or like podcast YouTube shows or whatever. And anyway, and we're gonna actually cover some of that shit next week. And to tease next week, I'm gonna force us to talk about electoral politics.
Oh, I love that shit.
Which goes against the rules of our channel.
That's when I get the drunkest, because like you pick a phrase that you've been hearing, get repeated a lot, and you're like, every time they say this, like during the last one, it's like every time he says malarkey, shots.
Oh shit!
You die.
Actually, I think we did play somewhat of a drinking game at several of the debates, but some of the debates when Bernie was in 2016, like there was groups of us that like rented out space at like Round Table and like watched the debates.
Nice.
Debate watch parties are fucking fun, actually.
Yeah.
You can get pretty fucking rowdy.
Yeah, I mean, we did it for the 2020, just here at home for the most part, but you get drunk real quick if you just pick a certain cue. Like every time Buttigieg mentions his partner or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. That's exactly how it went. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Every time Biden looked confused, it was like I died of alcohol poisoning that day.
This is all his fault.
No, I'm just kidding. It's remarkable how quickly he declined. That even just 2.5-3 years ago, he seemed to have even just a bit more bearings. Yeah. Like there's a notice just over the last couple of years. And then, if you watch Biden from 20 fucking years ago, it's like, holy shit, how is this the same person? But it is. It's just what 20 years of age looks like on someone who was either genetically or environmentally predisposed to or conditioned for getting neurological disorders. And also just we outlive our normal useful life.
Yeah.
So of course we experience degenerative diseases because we stop growing and we will die.
Yeah.
Just like other organisms experience degenerative diseases.
It's called dying, man.
At any rate, so this NYU thing, do you have any comments on that?
I don't know, the whole celebration of it and everything just seems a bit early because it didn't really do anything. Divesting, it doesn't do anything when the companies already have billions. They can keep going, and they're going to be fine. In fact, they can probably just buy back their stocks at a lower price. Do a stock buyback. Like if they hear that someone's divesting, that means there's going to be a whole bunch of stocks coming up for sale. Seems like a good thing to me.
And also like divestment's not like overnight they do this. It's like
Right.
their commitment to divestment is like over the next 10 or 15 years, right? Like,
Yeah.
and then she even said it, and it was like, oh, they tweeted how fucking proud, and like, let's not fucking knock the organizers. Anybody that stuck with that fight and was still writing letters and still having conversations about it 15 or 20 years after the fact, after they started, deserves at least like a good job, pat on the back, an attaboy, right? Attaboy.
They're there. They're there.
Yeah. But like the reality is that they fought for 20 fucking years. It doesn't matter. Like it doesn't matter if they're like, oh, we're going to divest over the next 15 years. We're already baked into the cake, probably 3, possibly 4 degrees C. Like it's too little and too late. And in my opinion, like fossil fuel companies, you're like, divestment is not at this point courageous. You know what I mean? Like divestment is smart economically because those oil companies can't fucking exist forever because it's a finite resource. We're already like losing the empire and figuring out how we're going to access enough of this to keep like the economy going a little longer. And it's not. They're going to keep parts of the economy going longer, and a lot of the economy is withering away, and that's what we're witnessing right now. That's where the disrupted supply chains and the pain you feel, the fact that like inflation stopped just briefly because we basically blew through our entire strategic reserve of oil. I need to like dig a little deeper into that, but my understanding is that we burned a lot of it. I'm not sure if we burned through the whole thing, but we essentially burned it. And you notice that like oil prices or gas prices went down to like what, 450, 425 or something.
Yeah.
For like 6 months. And now they're like, it was like fucking 570 at this Chevron I drive past to get the kids.
Oh wow.
It's cheaper like at the Safeway. It's like 506 or something. Yeah. But I was just, 570 is a price that you can see from the highway.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the Chevron.
I know the one you're talking about.
Yep, exactly. Because the big sign you could see from the highway. It's one of the few ones you can see from the highway. And the reality is that like there's no fixing that, right? So it's great that like they got this kind of like minor victory, but really like it's not really a victory, and B, like it's not really a concession that shows any courage. So we shouldn't the way that it's presented there and the way the words, right? Like I always think of rhetoric, right? The words used to describe that make it seem like this really good thing. But if you actually like just spend a second thinking about where it fits in the grand scheme of things, like I'm glad that New York University decided finally in 2023 to divest from fossil fuels, but it's too fucking late.
Yeah.
If you wanted to starve them of money, the way that like long-term infrastructure works, like those investments, and they have 20, 25, 30-year time horizons. If you're a nuclear power plant, you just keep asking them to extend your time horizon and you can exist indefinitely, apparently. Right? Like they just keep giving them extensions. Like, and so like, we're talking about maybe a 25, 30-year time horizon. You stop investing now. Like it's too fucking late. You needed to stop investing in like 1970. Like we needed to start making it difficult to finance new infrastructure when the oil embargo happened. Instead, we were like, oh my God, oil embargo. How do we drill more? How do we get more out? How do we rearrange the global order to help facilitate the extraction of this master resource so that we can maintain our economic systems? Because our ruling class, their primary objective is to maintain the system that enriches them.
Yeah. Yeah. And, it's really annoying to keep seeing all these, by 2035, we'll do this, we'll do that. And it's like, it really does. A lot of this shit started like 2015, 2020, and it really does feel like that is so far beyond like where we're gonna make it. Like I just don't know how we're supposed to get out of the how we're supposed to get out of the 2020s. Okay, you know.
We're not, I don't think we're supposed to. I think we
Yeah,
talked about it a little bit over when we went camping last weekend.
yeah.
That like this is the limits to growth, or maybe there's a conversation I had with Ryan. I don't know, on the way home, or was it on
Mm,
the way up? I don't recall. I had an excellent conversation about it, but we have discussed it here as well.
well, yeah.
Is that the bell curve? It's essentially a bell. They're lopsided bell curves,
Mhm.
but like the limits to growth curves, there's the period of growth, expansion, whatever, you complexification, right? Like
Ooh,
adding more and more and more and more layers to everything. You complex bureaucracies, technologies with multiple steps in the supply chain, et cetera, so forth, right? Like technologies dependent on resources that can only be sourced one place. Like all of
right.
these vulnerabilities were built into that system. And what we've been experiencing in our lifetime, I always joke, I came of age like I came of age like in the financial crisis, right? Like that's when I entered adulthood, and it shaped the rest of my fucking life and like my attitude about my role in society in terms of economic productivity, like and how I view myself in work and labor in relation to that system. Like all of these things happened because of that. And that's really us, the slowing down and cresting the hill. And we've been riding the top of that hill for the last 15 years. And we're just starting in that roller coaster, just starting to crest over where there's no longer pushing, but now we have gravity to feed us down that fucking slope. And it's going to be quick.
Yeah,
It's going to be
yeah.
real quick.
Well, there's a lot of entropy that you're overcoming, when you're using up all these resources, and
Yeah.
that's all going to compound real fucking quick. Like you have to repair all the shit that you were using to extract oil to get fewer and fewer barrels of oil,
Or
and so
how
it's
about
just going to go.
Yeah, and how about repairing our infrastructure? I
No,
think
it's not happening.
not long. What's that?
It's not happening.
It's not happening, and this is why it's not happening, because you can't continue to build new stuff and maintain your old stuff because you don't have a constantly expanding supply
Yeah,
of energy,
I was
and
watching a
it's just
video
a
that was.
fucking what's that?
I was watching a video about bridge infrastructure and basically how like uh, the extreme temperature changes that are going to be happening in the future are not taken into account for all bridges that are constructed. And so there's a fairly good chance that some bridges that are like still in good working order now will not be over the next like 10 years or so. So
No.
got that to look forward to.
Yeah, and speaking of climate disasters, that's a great segue, bro.
You're welcome.
Speaking of climate disasters and infrastructure that needs to be maintained and has catastrophic consequences when it is not maintained, let us shift gears now to Libya. Libya is a country in North Africa, and we're going to talk a little bit about it in a mini context. But there was a bad storm that moved through the Mediterranean and injured people in like Greece and other places. But it poured a lot of water on Libya, which again is North Africa, pretty degraded. Libya was originally part of the grain basket of Rome. So like most of North Africa was actually fairly productive until like Rome just fucking scraped it dry, right?
Yeah.
Conquered it and like took away its grain surplus and forced the farmers to fucking produce, like work the land harder and produce more and expand into areas where they shouldn't have been farming to try and feed themselves,
Yeah.
since the empire was taking the bulk of the surplus or all of the surplus. So if they wanted a surplus for like to hedge against a dry year or famine, it's a fucking mess.
Yeah.
Again, expansionary systems that have to expand, right? Like that's what that was. And anyway, Libya got a lot of rain and it flooded really bad. And so you have a map up. Folks should know where Libya is.
Dude,
It's
no.
North Africa.
I mean, hopefully people that are interested in our channel, yes, but not your average American. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say no.
All right. So let's, this is a minute and a half, right?
It is, yes.
All right, I will be.
Well, now we're going
you.
to
Go
take
ahead
you
and
to
play that
Libya, where the
shit.
country is still in shock after a Mediterranean storm triggered massive flooding on Sunday. More than 5,300 people were killed. 2 dams collapsed in the hardest hit city of Derna. Entire families and city blocks were swept away by waves, which rose more than 20 feet. Search teams are still retrieving bodies, but collapsed roads and bridges are restricting their movement. Our Holly Williams is following this from London.
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Derna was a city of 100,000 people, but the death toll is already over 5,000, according to local officials. And the city's mayor says that number could rise to 20,000. Storm Daniel, which killed 15 people in Greece last week, swept across the Mediterranean Sea and hit Libya's coastline on Sunday, causing 2 dams just outside Derna to burst. Floodwater then gouged its way through the city with waves up to 23 feet, according to one report, destroying entire city blocks, smothering them in brown silt and leaving the streets carpeted in bodies. One Libyan official said a quarter of Derna has been obliterated. They're now burying the dead in mass graves, some of them still unidentified. 30,000 people have been forced from their homes. Libya's people have suffered through years of civil war and violent extremism, leaving their country with 2 rival national governments. There were fears that would hamper the rescue effort, but the United Nations says they are now talking to each other.
Kumbaya, my lord.
Hey, man, as long as they're good talking. I mean,
there's 2 rival factions,
Yeah.
but the UN says they're working together. I'm glad that rival political factions can come together in a time
Somewhere.
of national crisis. What's that?
Said somewhere, certainly not here.
Yeah, you're right. Not here. Because then it's just one side blaming the other. That like every time it's like one side, the people who don't like who is in charge, which realistically is never really fully in charge. Like there's just an inertia to the bureaucracy, and there's like a depth and an anonymity buried within the bureaucracy. Like the person at the top has a lot of power, but when it comes to like, and really one of their biggest powers is the power of fucking rhetoric and perception. Like that's why I think why Obama was fairly pretty widely liked, right? Is that he just kind of had a calming demeanor. Like even though you knew he was shifty as fuck,
yeah,
right? He was just enriching the banks and doing drone bombing everybody and all that shit. Like he wasn't a fucking. He did what every other president had done before and has done since. So he wasn't like this radical person, but what he was successful in is like being able, I think, and at least, is being able to comfort. When bad shit happened, he would be like, he'd talk to the country, you know, he'd go out and visit with people and talk to them, and like came across as like very empathetic, even though as soon as he flew away, it's like, how can we fucking get another tax break before the next election, right? Like, how can we push another tax break through before the next election? So like, but he had that perception. I think that's one of the biggest responsibilities of the office of president. That being said, we can say with great effect, speaking of Obama, that Libya was, and he, I think himself said Libya was his greatest mistake. And of course, his Secretary of State at the time was Hillary Clinton, which is why even when we went camping, the joke, I really hope she doesn't, is still a thing that gets said 5-6 years later, which is a story that refers to apparently me having a conversation in my head while I was within a group of family and friends, and then just saying out loud, oh, I really hope she doesn't. And then everybody's like, what the fuck are you talking about? And then I was like, Hillary Clinton, I hope she doesn't become president. And then it's become a long-standing joke that like I'm just having conversations in my head about politics all the time.
Wouldn't
Wouldn't
be the first time.
blurt out a sentence and everybody has to try
and
and
play
catch
Steve?
up. At any rate, so yeah, that flooding is really fucking bad, and it made me think a lot about the flooding in Libya that we're talking about. It was really bad, and so there's like a human tragedy element to it, right? Like imperialism, as these next two clips will kind of say. Sure, there's two factions, right? There's always two political factions. There's largely two political factions in the United States, right?
Yeah.
And all they do is impeach each other when the other one's in office, and they don't fucking do anything because no one has a solution to the fundamental contradiction that we've based our entire freaking existence on an energy source that could not be procured and expanded indefinitely.
Well, not just that, but you're free and you have democracy as a citizen, but the moment you step into work, it's a dictatorship.
100%.
That is also contradictory. I would argue that is a bigger contradiction.
Well, it's a dictatorship until you're of legal age, right?
Yeah.
Like, and then it's a dictatorship. As soon as you're legal age, you're working, and it's a dictatorship of the fucking bosses, right? Like, and realistically, it's a dictatorship of capital, right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, especially since the bosses are the capitalists.
Right, exactly. But I mean, it's more than that, right? It's a dictatorship of capital in the sense that, like, we cannot exist without participating in a market economy and selling our labor. So it's not just that we're being exploited by bosses. It's that the system itself is structured in such a way that we cannot live we can't exist as an organism, right? Under this political jurisdiction, we can't exist as an organism without participating in the system.
Yeah.
That's not freedom.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, yeah, it reminds me of those really old comics where it's like, I just wish that we could change things ever so slightly. Yes, and yet you participate in society.
Right.
No.
Oh, you hate evil corporations? What's that you're holding? An iPhone?
Yeah.
Pwned. Like, no, dude. Like, we don't have a fucking choice.
Yeah.
I mean, you have a choice not to buy
Not to have a phone.
an iPhone.
Yeah.
And not to have a phone.
Yeah.
And not to have a smartphone. I do know people that had flip phones.
Yeah. But I mean,
I know
even
people that carried flip phones or like old Nokias and shit.
Yeah.
Mostly for security reasons. They're like, I do not want a fucking GPS.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's like, but you do, because you have a cell phone number with an account that's like tethered to, so you don't have enough points. It's not going to be as accurate to find you because there's fewer points to reference.
Yeah, it's just you switching between cell towers.
Yeah, they'll use cell towers and satellites and Wi-Fi networks, right? And then narrow down to exactly where you were within a few meters or whatever.
Keep your Bluetooth off if you're not using it.
What's that?
So keep your Bluetooth off if you're not using it.
Precisely. All right, cool. Next clip is Cristiano Yaman.
But they love me.
Yeah.
Talking to Muammar Gaddafi.
12 years ago.
All my people with me. They love me all.
But if they do love you,
they will die to protect me, my people.
If you say they do love you, then why are they capturing Benghazi and they say they're against you there? Why are they in Zawiya?
It is Qaeda, not my people. It is Qaeda. Qaeda, yes.
Colonel Gaddafi, the President of the United States, the leaders of Britain and other leaders are calling on you to step down, to leave Libya, to leave your position of power. Will you do that?
When do you get the glasses?
Who would leave his homeland? Why do I leave my homeland? Why do I leave Libya?
They say that they've done it because you have ordered force against your people, shooting of protesters.
This is
lying. 100%.
They say that you ordered air attacks against people, against civilians, and helicopter gunships. Your own pilots, Air Force pilots, at least 2, have defected, saying that they did not want to carry out orders against the people. Did you give such orders?
Yeah.
He's going to deny it, of course.
Yeah.
And most of the evidence suggested that didn't really happen, or if it did, like, it was minor. I don't actually recall the details. I don't think that he did. I think that's just American propaganda. But I don't want to say for certain, but I did think that was very interesting that he's kind of speaking English.
Kind of, yeah.
and having a conversation, and she's like, oh, they want you to resign. And then all of a sudden, the next clip, he's got sunglasses and he's not speaking any English, and it's all through a translator. From then out, he's like, yo, fuck you.
Well, not only that, but like it seems like that could also be an indication that it was taken out of order. Like that's not the way the interview even played out.
Oh, no, it definitely did not play out that way. It was edited that way.
Yeah.
But I genuinely do think that he had a reaction.
Oh, yeah. He's like, well,
them saying that.
Fuck
like,
you.
Is essentially like, fuck you.
Yeah.
And so when we talk about Libya and these dams collapsing, we kind of glossed over that, right? 5,300 people died, tens of thousands displaced. And part of the reason that happened is a dam collapse, 12 feet of water, 20 something feet of water, I think I heard. And did all this. It just kind of was interesting because I was telling Brooke, I was like, yeah, here's some context of what it could have looked like if the Oroville Dam collapsed.
Yeah.
Because here we are in the United States, and you know, our infrastructure is just as bad.
Yeah.
For the opposite reason. Theirs is bad because the state is non-functioning because NATO went in shortly after that, right? She's like, oh, they want you to step down. And he's like, what the fuck? It was like a matter of weeks, maybe a couple months, and he was fucking gone.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and he had done so much good stuff. And, you know, that boils down to like he was trying to make a Pan-African gold-backed currency. And so there's that kind of like maintaining the petrodollar and stuff.
Right.
That was elements of that. And that was just kind of like an easy hit during the Arab Spring. There were some protests. Of course, people are not everybody's going to agree with the fucking people in charge. But like many did. And a lot of the infrastructure projects I remember reading of were crazy. Like he had basically dug underground tunnels to move water from this ancient aquifer like into the urban areas and to irrigate land and expand that. So he had expanded agriculture. I want to say they had like 100% public housing and 100% fucking free medicine. Like if you were fucking pregnant, not only like did all your medical expenses get covered, your delivery and all that stuff, but you left the hospital with like a stipend. Like they just gave you money, kind of like what we think we should do when people get out of prison, or some of us think we should do with prisoners, right? Like, here's a fucking fat chunk of money. You know how you were only getting paid $1.50 an hour for all that firefighting? You were actually getting paid $15, and we put that $14 an hour that you were made. So, you know, whatever, thousands and thousands of dollars over, you know, many years of a prison sentence. Bam, here it is with interest. It's yours. Here's like 60 grand. You can pay a year in an apartment up front, right?
Yeah.
So you don't have to fucking worry about having a house. Or like,
so you don't go right back into
paying your rent. You just have a place to stay for a year.
Yeah,
it would be a better way to do it.
Oh yeah, you definitely take a good whack at recidivism if you did that. It's like most of the time when people go back, it's because they're like, well, no one will hire me, and I don't have anywhere to live, so I got to steal.
And people won't rent to you or whatever. If you go to a landlord and you're like, hey, I'm paying for a year up front, they would be like,
yeah.
Here's where you sign.
You can commit felonies in front of me. I don't care.
I don't give a shit. At any rate, not to diminish it or shift gears too much. But you know, here's this place that the dams. I don't know if the dams would have been maintained. I don't know what their standards were. It's quite possible because they never were a wealthy country before they were deposed. Like they were in the process of development. Yeah, you couldn't be a wealthy country because they've been fucking colonies forever.
Right.
But he was fucking, they had an economy. They were investing fucking oil money into the productive capacity of the people and the welfare of the people. Much like Venezuela building fucking public housing units and providing sanitation infrastructure and stuff like that. To a very poor populace. They're like, yeah, we're going to use these resources for the good of everybody.
People. Yeah.
Imagine that. But sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, you know, the thing where he's like, oh, they love me. The people love me. And I'm like, I don't care if a fucking president was doing everything I'd ever wanted a president to do. I don't love you. Do your fucking job. That's what I hired you for.
Yeah, their relationship's a little different, right?
Hmm.
Soleimani and Assad and all these guys, like they just plaster their pictures everywhere because they're national heroes. And I think that's because coming from like the heart of empire, like our sense, you and I, our sense of nationalism is severely diminished because we haven't needed nationalism, because nationalism has existed for many, many generations in these countries that shook the yoke of colonialism, right? I think that nationalism means a lot more to them
Okay, that makes sense.
because it's part of the movement that helped liberate them from colonial masters.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I could be just pulling that shit out of my ass.
I mean, it sounds good at least. You know, it's pretty good for something that might have come out of your ass.
That's true. All right. And then finally, what happened to Libya? How did Libya get to a place where like a heavy rain would cause so much destruction due to bad infrastructure? In part, it was a failed state because the U.S. invaded, and we have to remember kind of the mask off, the emperor with no clothes, in Hillary Clinton relishing in the death of that man.
So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed.
Yes, we came, we saw, he died.
Did it have anything to do with your visit?
No, I'm sure it did.
She definitely workshopped that with a whole bunch of people. And they were like, Hillary, don't say that. And she's like, no, it's good.
Nah, those people surround themselves with yes men and women. They just want to be told they're right.
Yeah.
I honestly don't think there would have been pushback, or at that point they're so fucking arrogant that they don't take the advice.
Yeah, that's what I'm picturing. You know, like even if someone's like, maybe that's not such a sensitive thing to say, shut up.
And how many times do you say, hey, I don't know if I would do that, and get fucking basically bitch slapped?
Yeah. Verbally
bitch slapped, like, nah, I'm going to do what I want.
Yeah.
Before you're like, whatever you want.
I'm going to be the president.
I'm going to be an advisor to the Secretary of State.
Yeah.
Right? Like, my position is high. There's a lot of bureaucrats where like that is the peak of their career. I mean, my friend, my friend Lewis Elbinger, he was a lifelong diplomat in the State Department, and his last job was as a State Department attaché to U.S. Central Command, which Central Command's overseeing all operations in the Middle East and Central Asia, right?
Okay.
And so he was the State Department attaché to that organization. So he worked in the same building as James Mattis, General James Mattis, who would become briefly Trump's defense secretary. And then he resigned, I think, once he realized that like they had no integrity and had no interest in maintaining like the honor, I guess you could say, of the institutions. And he resigned, I believe, or he was pressured to resign. I forget which it was. Either way, he worked with him. And so he's like, that's fucking top tier. If you're working in an office with really, really important people, and Lewis said he, in his role, had several meetings with Clinton when she was the Secretary of State, right? Like he's in a pretty fucking important position. If he's not like the person that she's meeting with privately, like he is leading the presentation of something in a meeting with her, right? Like, and that's the fucking that is the top for most bureaucrats is being in that position. So I could totally see them not being like, whatever you want. Yeah, I thought the joke was great. It's like Carpe Diem. Carpe Gaddafi. And you know what she was laughing about? Do you know how he died?
Nope.
He was captured by a mob. And when he said Al-Qaeda, CIA was operating, was funding like Islamist groups in Libya at the time. Remember, she mentioned that like, oh yeah, and Benghazi and all that shit. Remember when Hillary Clinton had all that fucking Benghazi bullshit?
Yeah.
Yeah. All of that was related to that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I think people died. They took over. So it wasn't just like we were against Gaddafi, right? Because they sacked a fucking U.S. embassy too, right? So
Damn.
it's not like they're pro-U.S. So you
Yeah.
gotta go because they sacked our embassy, or you gotta go because whatever, right? Because you wanted a gold-backed currency to undermine the petrodollar. You gotta go. Open slave markets. Anyway, we came, we saw, we died. He died. He died by, I think, a mob caught him or like intercepted his convoy or something and drug him out onto the side of the road and fucking sodomized him with a bayonet.
Oh.
They stabbed his insides through his fucking asshole.
Yeah.
And that is so fucking absolutely brutal. And so when we make jokes, I really hope she doesn't. That's why.
Yeah.
Because that lives in my mind. That lives in my mind that she fuck feminists. If feminists want fucking Hillary Clinton, they don't actually want to advance justice for fucking women.
Mm-hmm.
No, because she's not a fucking feminist. If she's like, oh, you know what's really funny? Fucking rape. Like, you can't be a feminist and think fucking rape is funny.
I mean, it's impalement.
But you're right. Somebody should have stepped up and put their career on the line to fucking prevent that shit from being said.
But hey, she got to run for president anyway.
So let's shift gears pretty fucking hard. Let's go from women laughing about men being sodomized with bayonets to men screaming like little girls, which is not to insult little girls, but screaming.
They can scream pretty fucking loud
over a cartoon character in live action. Star Wars Ahsoka.
Oh my God! He's not even got it. Oh.
Still got it. Ghost. Every last second of it.
Holy shit! What's going on?
Move.
Stop this! Stop! No! What are we getting? Look at this shot! I can't handle it.
Okay.
So I must be missing out on something because I don't think I've ever had anything like that in my life.
Where you were that excited about it?
Yeah, about anything.
Well, when we watched last week's episode together, like I jumped up when I saw that Merrick was just like Night Sister Magic.
Yeah.
I was like, well, I mean, I didn't do that, but I was like, oh shit! Like I said it out loud, like, which is kind of the equivalent, right?
Yeah. I don't know. For me, I guess that episode wasn't really like, oh shit. It was just like, okay. Like, you know,
Yeah,
what are you trying to interpret from all these scenes?
About it. Episode 5 of Ahsoka, it was called Shadow Warrior.
Yeah. I didn't take great notes for this one. So I do have a little run through of what happened in the episode pulled up. I mean, if you look at just the summarization of it, it's like Syndulla arrived on Cetos, where she finds Ahsoka and Ren gone. And then Jason's like, hey, I can use the Force, apparently. Do you hear lightsabers? And it turns out that he's hearing what's going on in those scenes that they're really overreacting to, in my opinion. Like, he's still got it. He's a fucking Force ghost. Why would he not have it? Like, that's kind of a ridiculous statement, but yeah. Where'd you go? Oh, no.
I'm sorry. I just need to open my door. I realized last time I grabbed a beer, I shut the door. And so
there you are.
Just come install a whole house fan after years of me wanting one, but the window is cracked and the door is closed, so air is not drawing through, so it's getting hot. So I'm just going to open the door.
Gotcha.
Finish your thoughts on Jason Syndulla hearing the
oh yeah. I mean, that was cool and all, and I look forward to having a new generation of Jedi already in the wings, waiting to come out. I think that was kind of inevitable. They're almost assuredly going to do like a new Jedi order thing, where they have like a kid show where all the, it'll be like, kids and tweens and shit like that. And maybe even like, some super young.
You really think
teenagers.
so?
Yeah,
You
man.
think
Oh,
they're
dude, it's
trying to
fucking
set up a
Disney, man.
tween show?
There's money to be wringed out of people. You better fucking believe they're
Yeah,
gonna
it's
do it.
like the Wizards of a galaxy far, far away instead of the Wizards of Waverly Place or some shit.
The Wizards of Coruscant.
Shut the fuck up.
I'm telling you, man, that shit'll happen.
Hannah Bothana. Hannah the Boffin. Oh, God. She's
Young
a boffin that lives in
Mon
a hotel with a famous dad.
Rebel babies. Anywho, yeah, and so I mean it's pretty cool. But then it's funny, the only real thought that I like wrote down the entire time I was watching the episode was Hu Yang related, because Hu Yang's the best character in the show.
He's the best fucking character.
And that was he talks again. I'm gonna go back to that whole thing where he's like 75% original parts. And I really hope that he used up some of that 25% for like memories. Because it occurred to me when he was looking at the Purgils, how he had mentioned like, oh, what Purgils? When they like spoke about it earlier, as he was unconscious. And then it occurred to me like, oh man, wouldn't it be a shame if his memory was finite and he had to like trim memories in order to keep important things? Because he was looking at them with such awe, if you can read a droid's state of mind. That it'd be like, oh, I bet he would really want to keep that memory, but like if it came down to it, it's not mission critical, and so he might just get rid of it.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think we do that without thinking at all.
Oh,
right?
sure,
like our brain just does it.
Yeah.
Because like we got in. Do you remember that we got in an accident in your Honda?
Yes, outside
you
of Baton
remember
Rouge.
the state we were in?
Yes, Baton Rouge, Louisiana.
It wasn't Baton Rouge.
Well, it was close to it, I believe.
It was St. Charles, I think.
Okay, I do remember that the people,
town.
the people who crashed into us were going to go see Blues Traveler, and we
Very
were going to go see Slayer, and neither of those things happened for either party, because
we were going to go see Slayer like months
later, but
or
me not having a car really fucked that whole thing up. Yeah,
but anyway, they were going to see Blue Traveler. You remember that? Do you remember what they were driving?
Something bigger, a 4-wheel, not a truck.
Yeah, it was like a Chevy Suburban or like a Tahoe or a Yukon, I think.
Yeah, whatever that's called. What is that called?
But it's just an SUV.
SUV, okay. Yeah.
But it's like a full size. Like it's not like these little compact SUVs that everybody loves. Like it's got 8 seats if you fold the fucking back one up.
Yeah, but I remember that. I don't remember how much gas costs. I remember that it was cheaper than any other sign we'd seen in a long time, and that's what encouraged us to go there to begin with. Ended up being completely irrelevant. Car didn't work.
Right, but I just mean like your mind trims out a lot of those details.
Yeah, and mine tends to keep stories. So like if someone's telling me a story about like, oh, this was my plan, and like, oh, it thinks that's ruined, I'm going to remember that decades later. But I will not remember anything about the town that we were in or anything like that, or potentially, the person's name. That's like the first thing to go.
Yeah, at any rate, so Hu Yang's memory getting trimmed is an interesting concept. And he remembered a lot. Speaking of Hu Yang and also Jason Sindula, where I guess you kind of are like, this is kind of lame, but I did think some of it was kind of lame. Like, oh, his father, Keenan Jarrus. It's like, of course you need all that fucking meat for the red meat for the fucking cameo fanboys or whatever, right?
Yeah,
the fan service bullshit, right? Didn't think it was necessary. Was surprised they hadn't mentioned him earlier.
I mean, kind of just
there was a better way to introduce that than being like, oh, his father was a Jedi.
I mean, if you're just watching this, if you're someone who got Disney Plus for like fucking Marvel or whatever, and you're like, yeah, I'll watch Star Wars, and you're watching this, and you don't really know all that much about Star Wars, that's vital information.
Yeah, but why didn't they not introduce that earlier in the series?
Right. I remember when we were talking about the show, I mentioned to you, I was like, it never fucking occurred to me that Jason has like no Twi'lek features. Didn't even come into my mind that he looked nothing like his own mother. And I was just man,
yeah,
I am the least racist person there is.
There's a clone trooper who went AWOL and married a Twi'lek, and they had children, and both the children looked like Twi'leks and had no human features.
Yeah, interesting.
So I think it's kind of like more like, I was gonna say eye color, but even eye colors blend. Like
he has green hair.
Blue and brown can turn into hazel, right? Like but like skin color is the worst example because skin color comes in so many tones, like it kind of mixes in ratios, and so it's not really like a dominant recessive gene thing. You know what I mean? Like it manifests itself in a fundamentally different way.
Jason has green hair though. I did notice that. Like he
does.
So I'm like,
and he has kind of pointy ears.
Yeah.
You can't really tell, but he has kind of pointy ears. So he does have like kind of light features, but you're right. He doesn't have Leiku.
Yeah.
Right. Like he doesn't have head tails or whatever.
Yeah. But that means that Twi'leks and humans can interbreed.
Which I think I mentioned to Brooke. I was like, this makes no fucking sense. You have species that are separated by like, not just separated on different continents or whatever.
Or different planets in the same system.
They're not the same genus. They're from like fucking different star systems.
Yeah. Well,
the likelihood of their fucking biology being compatible is like, you know, in a world where you can travel between planets would still be next to nothing.
Yeah, but apparently it's 100% if a clone can fuck them and make kids. So
yeah,
it
doesn't really matter to me.
I mean,
but it always makes me think of that Clerks 2 scene, interspecies erotica.
They do it in Star Wars. They had it happen, and they're like, "Oh, it turned like they kind of like retconned it after a while. Like, why is it you can have like half Vulcan, half human, half Romulan, half human, half Klingon, half human?" And they're like, in the Next Generation, they retconned it. They're like, "Oh, there was a creator species that basically like seeded life on all these different worlds."
Oh shit!
And so, of course, the DNA was at least somewhat similar.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's a fascinating retcon. And then they made fucking Prometheus.
Yeah, exactly.
It was about that shit.
I mean, that was a totally different series, many years later, but
basically the same concept, right?
Yeah, same concept.
I mean, like if there's life on multiple planets, maybe they all came from the same place. It's like accepting the fact that, like, no, there's like divine intervention. Right?
Yeah, probably.
Or divine influence on everything instead of just being like, no, when you run the numbers enough, eventually you'll get the fucking, eventually it'll come up.
We all know it was the midichlorians.
We do.
They birthed another child, damn it.
They willed it to happen. Anyway, yeah, I thought it was interesting when he's like, oh, do you know how to make lightsabers? And they didn't like really dwell on it, but like that's what he did.
Yeah, I thought that was
like,
funny.
Yes. He's like, that was one of the better scenes for me.
It was. Can you teach me?
You want to train me? No. And he's like, oh, you have a training room? Yes. Are you going to train me? No. Like, do you know how to make lightsabers? Yes. Can you help me make a lightsaber? No.
Not happening. Got to get your mom's permission.
Which is funny because Hu Yang should be like, if Ahsoka wants me to.
Well, I mean, it should also just be like, the Jedi kidnapped children in the days of yore. So why not just kidnap this one?
Well, I think that like he can't make that directive on his own. I think that if Ahsoka was like, "Oh yeah, no, I'm going to start training him on combat, meditation, all these other kinds of the philosophy and everything else, I'm going to start teaching him this stuff. If you would like to start teaching him about like the basic components of a lightsaber, right, and like how they function and stuff, so that he can begin his process and journey of acquiring the components and getting his crystal or whatever, right, and so his lightsaber tells a story for him, relevant to him. I think that would be appropriate. I think that might be there. So we don't have a ton of time. We're kind of almost at an hour now. I'm not opposed to running to an hour and 15.
I mean, I don't know how much more there is. It was a dense episode in terms of like, again, when I was
go ahead.
Well, again, when I was talking to you, like there was a period of time in the show where I thought like, oh, she's dead. He's kind of like training her to become a Force ghost right now. He like pulled her out of I forget what it's called, but they basically have like an afterlife, like the Netherlands or something like that. And so I was like, oh, he basically pulled her out of the Netherlands, huh?
Purgatory.
One more time so I can clip it.
Purgatory.
Here we go. 59:30.
I wish I made it up. I'm not that clever.
Anyway, where was I? Fuck, that made me laugh.
She's in the afterlife.
Oh yeah. So I was convinced, like, oh, she's in the afterlife, and he's going to be, you know, he pulled her into a place so that she wouldn't, you know, disperse into the Force, and he's now going to teach her how to manifest as a Force ghost. And like, I thought that for a while as I was watching it. It's just like, oh,
really?
Okay, cool,
I did
interesting.
not.
That's where they're going to take this, but it, you know, quickly proved to be no. It's just the world between worlds, and Zach hates the world between worlds.
He does.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know, do you feel different about the world between worlds? No.
I still don't like it.
So I felt it was really important after they introduced it in Rebels,
Mm-hmm.
and Dave Filoni said in an interview, it's not like time travel. You can't just pop in and out of doors.
Yeah.
And then this episode, I think, really showed in a fundamental way that it's really about the individual's experience. So the reason that in the world between worlds, like Ezra saw, he heard a lot of things, right? And people he knew, he had met Yoda before as an astral projection, right? Because Yoda was alive at the time. He met Yoda in the temple on Lothal, and then he met Obi-Wan in person on Tatooine when Maul used Ezra to bait Kenobi to come out of hiding so he could attempt to kill him, but instead die. And then he heard or he saw Ahsoka, where he actually witnessed that with his own eyes. And it was a traumatic experience because there's so few Force users, and he really admired her because, like, she was fulcrum, right? Like, so she had worked her way up, and Kanan was kind of flip-floppy, and, like, you know, she had fought in the Clone Wars, like, and really had gone above and beyond that, right? And, like, interacted with people and knew people like Maul, and, like, had all this wisdom and experience that Kanan didn't have, right? Because Kanan was still considerably younger. He had just been taken as a Padawan, I think, towards the end of the Clone Wars. Whereas Ahsoka had been brought on as a Padawan, like, at the very beginning, and also had, like, two of the fucking, arguably the best Jedi Knight and one of the best Jedi Masters in the whole fucking order.
Right.
As mentors, right? And also not just that, like, she had fucking what's his name? The Keldor. His name's slipping my mind.
Plo Koon?
Yeah, Plo Koon. Plo Koon they were super close also. And so she had, you know, all of this one-on-one time with these crazy Jedi Masters. Kanan never got that.
Yeah. Well,
Kanan
and don't forget R2-D2,
who was a kind of minor Jedi, right?
I mean, don't forget R2-D2. He probably killed more droids than, you know, all three of those Jedi combined.
That's true, but still not as many as Chopper.
That's true. I mean, like, Chopper learned from the best. Clearly, he was studying R2-D2. He's like, how can I better kill other droids?
So anyway, here's the things that I liked. I would probably, I think I gave the last episode a 9. I would probably give this one an 8.
Yeah.
For me, it just didn't hit as hard. My biggest problems with it, and I mentioned these to you in person, but for the sake of the show, my biggest problems were the villains are one of the best parts of this fucking show, and you didn't show them at all.
And you know that one of them's going away too at the end of the season, which is very sad.
Yeah, and you know at least, like, one of the ones that we're attached to, we don't get anymore.
Yeah.
Because the actor fucking died. Unless they recast, and I'm not opposed to that. I think if the actor and the writing on the character, if the actor portraying the character and the writing for the character are comparable, I think I would be okay with a recast. I also think in some ways it would be disrespectful, but, like, it's not his character. He was an actor, a worker. It was he got to play him for a while, and, you know, how many fucking Spider-Mans have they been? How many Batmans
Doctor Who's have there been?
There've been fucking half a dozen Batmans at this point, right?
Yeah,
6, 7, 8 Batmans, right?
The 12th Doctor or some shit like that.
Yeah, Doctor Who's an even better example, but I don't watch that shit.
What?
I should, but I don't.
You should.
At any rate, I was really disappointed because I think on Monday we discussed, I was like, I wanted Hera to face, like, I wanted to feel like there was stakes for Hera and feel like there might be some consequences. I got that. And I really did like that.
Yeah.
I said I wanted some time with the villains because we don't need a lot. We need maybe 2 cutscenes, something to happen for the villains that's relatively minor, right?
Mhm.
Present it in the first time they're talking, resolve it in the second time they're talking, right? Like maybe a conflict between Shin and Sabine, where you find out that they're actually very similar in their outlook on life and where they come from and what motivates them. And now you've just like explained one of our heroes or heroines along with one of our female villains, and you've now like shown that there's almost a dichotomy or an overlap or a similarity between them and added depth to where if they have to fight again, that fight stakes are so much fucking higher. Like, why don't we write this shit? Because we can't always be high and drunk and have no fucking experience because we didn't study like English or theater when we were in fucking college.
Yeah, and no feedback or anything like that. I definitely do think that Disney. I definitely do think that like there are some hardcore Star Wars nerds out there with like encyclopedic knowledge, and it's always disappointing when these companies don't tap that. Like, I'd tap that. They need to tap that.
Yeah, I'd tap that shit. But honestly, you're right, because I've mentioned that before. I was like, if they really wanted like really fucking like inexpensive content, so have people write up like do it like you do Visions and just have short stories. And it could be like 4 1-hour short stories is like a season.
Yeah.
And you get these independent like movie producers because there's so much fan fiction online, and a lot of it is pretty damn good. And if they thought they could have Disney as a guaranteed distributor, like they probably would be able to have bigger budgets.
I was even thinking of you make a TV show called Who Wants to Be a Star Wars Writer. You dramatize the hell out of it. You make money off making that show.
And just make a reality
People
TV
pay
show.
to come to you to get their shit. Just because that type of show was the most genius.
America's got the next greatest fucking Star Wars TV show.
Yeah. Like those shows were the smartest thing that audio production companies ever did. They don't have to pay to travel anymore to find talent. It comes to them. They don't have to pay people to audition. People basically pay them to audition. Like, it's genius. And so you just make money and you get to air it and make more money. It's fucking wonderful.
Yeah,
terrible,
and then
but
you
wonderful.
get to kind of edit it down into these like these kind of human interest stories, just like they do with the Olympics. It's like I want to watch them fucking do the little brush on the fucking ice with the thing. Like, I want to watch curling. I don't want to hear about like how, he worked really hard to get to the Olympics and his mom died 2 years ago and he wasn't sure he was going to stick with it. But everybody said, you got to stick with curling. And then here he is. He's going to be a silver medalist. Yeah. I was like, I don't give a shit about that. I don't give a shit. His mom died. I don't give a shit. I just want to see him look like brushing the fucking
Canadian
ice.
curling team. Gorgeous.
At any rate, man, like, so I really was upset they didn't have villains. And the other thing that bothered me, because it was a missed opportunity just to build, and you didn't need a lot, like 2 or 3, 4 or 5 minute sequences.
I'm gonna go the opposite direction. I actually I thought it was refreshing to have this show focus entirely on the titular character. Like, that felt kind of important, because after the last 3 shows we had where you kept getting intrusive thoughts from outside of that show, like, oh, what's all this Mandalorian in my Boba Fett, and shit like that. It's nice to have at least one episode where it's almost entirely focused on the main character.
Yeah. I agree, kind of, but here's the thing. Here's the other thing I didn't like about the episode.
Do it. What?
I don't think that they spent enough time or enough words in the world between worlds and the flashbacks, which I thought were cool.
Mhm.
And I thought, as that kind of hype video YouTube short showed, like there was some decent lightsaber fight choreography. There was some good editing. There was some good kind of like tension building. What I didn't feel like Ahsoka, because clearly Ahsoka came out of that as Ahsoka the White, right?
Mhm.
She essentially died and came back as now the White Wizard, right? Yeah, your background. That's where all that comes from, right?
Yeah.
And that was what it was meant to portray. She's in a white fucking tunic when she does all of her shit, right?
Yeah. After the
Yeah, so they're portraying essentially she died and came back as the White Wizard, right? Like,
Yeah.
she renewed a rebirth, a renaissance for this character. And I did appreciate that, like, now all of this, like, I don't know what's rubbing me wrong about this character, but it feels off. And then by the end of this episode, after her trial, I guess you could say it was, like, even though Yoda already said that she had completed her trials, like, actually, like, having to defend herself and her integrity in that whole being framed by Barriss Offee and the trial that eventually made her leave the Order,
right?
Because everybody turned on her and thought she was a fucking terrorist. And she's like, "What the fuck? I'm not a terrorist. I hang out with you guys all the time. You know that." And they're like, "We don't care."
When would I be terrorizing?
Yeah, when would I have a chance? But anyway, they turned on her, and then she's like, "Oh, fuck you," and she left the Order before she got trained. And then even then, Yoda's like, "You can stay." And frankly, like, it's good of a trial as any Jedi needs, like, or whatever he said, right? Like, so she was going to be a Jedi Knight if she stayed. She wasn't going to be a Padawan anymore. But she didn't really have her knighting, and this kind of like was supposed to represent like her finishing her training, her going through her trial. And I didn't feel there was any stakes, and I didn't feel it was coherent how to move from point A to point B. It wasn't until some other folks pointed out, oh, she was basically groomed to be a child soldier. And I had never really thought about it. I was like, oh shit, you're right. That's fucking dark as fuck. But that's essentially what she was, right?
Yeah.
Like, and you know, of course there was always a guilt. Like, I left Anakin, because she said it earlier in this series, and she said it in Rebels too. I left Anakin, you know, he turned to the dark side. It's kind of my fault. And I think they did a fairly decent job that, like, showing like when he ran off into the smoke or whatever, and you can kind of see like the Vader, like, right, like, the flashed Vader. You could see like it trying to commute the world between worlds, and her experience with him and his consciousness in the world between worlds was trying to say, like, you didn't make me turn to Vader. Like, this was a long time coming. But then he kept coming back to this. You just need to fight. You just need to fight. When she was trying to say, I don't want to fucking fight anymore.
Right.
Like, I've been fighting my whole life, and this isn't kind of like what I wanted to be. Like, I didn't want to do this. And I think, honestly, that lends a lot of weight to Barriss Offee's kind of complaint in that final arc that Ahsoka was in the Clone Wars. Because realistically, that's what she said. She's like, you guys fell apart. It's like, you became instruments of fucking evil by like participating. We were supposed to be guardians of the peace, not fucking soldiers. And you guys fell into it. You allowed yourself, your arrogance and your sense of self-importance to be like drawn into this fucking web of deceit. Right. Like, and I think there's a lot to that. And I don't think they fleshed that out enough. And I don't feel convinced that what we saw in that episode was enough to take that character from where she was to this like enlightened, I'm giving myself to the Force. I have no idea where this whale is going. I'm just going to climb into his fucking mouth and go along for the ride, right? Like, I don't feel convinced that that transformation took place within the confines of that episode and within the confines of that kind of scene. And I think that's one of my biggest problems with the episode.
I mean, it's really hard to show a psychological journey as well. That's not going to be super compelling. You know, like, what happened was probably as close as you can get to like just being inside someone's mind as they're coming to the realization that like, no, like Anakin always had darkness. Me not being there
had nothing to do with his turn.
Me being there would not have stopped him. He probably would have just killed me. So I mean, like,
at any rate, you want to roll the music? We'll shut it down because we're like right at an hour 15. If you don't count the 3 or 4 minutes that the fucking title card was showing. All right, this has been with Thunderous Applause, a podcast where two friends get together and talk about Star Wars and other shit. Today,
Some
our
other
other
stuff
shit
that
was,
pops up.
it was about climate and how NYU finally decided to divest eventually from fossil fuels way too late. And then we talked about flooding in Libya, which is a good example of why it's too late. Why divestment is a day late, a dollar short, because there were some really bad floods there and it killed a lot of people and it destroyed a lot of shit. But it's not just climate change that causes death and destruction and human misery. It's also the human disasters embodied in that. And in the case of Libya would be the American Empire, where our revered public officials make jokes about people getting raped with bayonets. Of course, talking about Hillary Clinton laughing about Muammar Gaddafi's death by sodomy. And then we talked about Ahsoka. What's that?
Fourth wave feminism?
Fourth wave feminism, fifth wave.
Or whatever that is.
Synthetic, transcendent fucking feminism. At any rate, and then speaking of female heroes, we talked a little bit about Ahsoka. That was a pretty damn good episode, and it was an Ahsoka-centric episode. It definitely, episode 4 and 5 for me. Let me know your opinion, but for me, episode 4 and 5 have made 1, 2, and 3 fucking worth it.
I mean, 1, 2, and 3 were just there to kind of set things up. Get you used to the characters.
All right, man. Well, this has been fun. And always here at with Thunderous Applause, we like to remind you that when liberty dies, it dies with thunderous applause. Show me some